have you ever had a chance encounter? You've met someone randomly and all the stars have aligned, something awesome has come from it. But I kind of had that experience at the Woking Guitar Show, and this show is all about that. I'm Hello Sailor Effects, and today my co-host is
John Mulholland, Space Wolf. Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year, mate. And our awesome guest today.
Hi, I'm Mitch. Well, my name's Thomas Mitchener, but everyone calls me Mitch. So yeah, hi everyone.
Cool. This come about, I've got to throw it out there. We were at the Woking Guitar Show, and I think, Mitch, you come past the stand, didn't you? And you just plugged a few pedals in, we got talking, and you mentioned, you're a recording engineer, you're doing all this stuff. And I was like, man, I've got to get you on the show, because there's so much related to like fitting in the mix and guitar that we don't discuss on the show. And that's how we kind of met.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'd seen your pedals before, because obviously, like most guitarists, producers, we're constantly online looking at loads of pedals and various things. And yeah, when I was walking along and I just caught it and I was like, I recognize it. And then yeah, checked out all your stuff. But yeah, no, definitely. No, it's I don't often go to those guitar shows. But when one was on my doorstep, I thought I couldn't resist,
Oh, I had to. And quickly, just before we move on, thank you to everyone, especially the few people who chipped in and bought me my award, which is, I don't know if you can see it on camera there. I haven't mounted it to the wall yet. Hit 10K subscribers, mate. And some of the guys who watch the channel all chipped in and bought me an award. Unbelievable. And also, being a sailor, I'm rather partial to a bottle of rum. So Mount Gay. So I cracked it open for today's episode just to cheers to everyone. So thanks very much for that.
I'll toast you with my coffee then.
Yeah, I've got my 10,000. That's amazing, though. Well done.
Yeah, Jimmy Smith. From Scandals Repairs. Like he really coordinated that. He got all the all the stuff together, and so hopefully third time's a charm. Your package is being sent to him, and now he's going to be able to at least physically hand it to you next time he sees you or mail it to you. So.
Honestly, I thought I was going to get zip tied up and thrown in.
I never thought
last time.
I walked out to the mailbox and opened it up and saw it in there. I'm like, I never expected to see that again.
Yeah, they had the sniffer dogs on it, and they called me on it in and said, "You expecting a package?" And I was like, "Yeah." What's inside? Components, and they were like, "And what else?" Like, I don't fucking know. He sent it to the base that I work on, and it didn't pass the sniffer dogs anyway. I don't know.
Some of those were some vintage components. Yeah, and they might have had Mercury switches and stuff like that. Like, I have no idea what some of the things I sent you could have contained.
That's going to look like a bomb, a load of transistors and circuit boards together.
Yeah.
So I don't know what happened there, mate. But
I mean, it's hard enough getting a pedal board onto an aeroplane, a domestic flight without.
Gosh, yeah.
What on earth, all those buttons with lights on, and you're trying to explain it to someone, you think. Yeah.
We're trying to tour with a vintage guitar that has Brazilian rosewood back and sides, and trying to keep them from seizing it at the border every time.
Yeah,
I wouldn't take the risk. It's just
most people don't. They have a travel guitar that they don't. Don't take the beauties out.
I've seen too many destroyed guitars from that way. Yeah.
Oh man, I flew from I flew to Dubai on stand down on deployment one time. My wife flew from the UK out there, and I flew from Bahrain. We both got in and were there. And I was like, you know what? While we're here, we got a bit of money. I'm buying a guitar, and I bought this Les Paul Custom. And then flying from Dubai to Bahrain on this flight that I can only describe as like the school bus of planes. They were like, "Sir, you can't have that in the plane." I was like, "Well, it's coming on the plane." I know it's got to go in the hole that I absolutely fucking know. In the end, I convinced them, like, well, Jesus.
Well done.
I would not have survived.
You had to do like Chuck Berry and buy a ticket for your guitar.
Well, no, what I played the hold everyone up tactic. So I just stood there at the gate in front of everyone, like, I don't understand what you're saying, mate. Bit of a thick Scouse accent. And every time said, "Say this," I was like, I don't understand, mate. What I don't know, it's the words. And they were like, just go on. Anyway. Thank you very much anyway for my award. I really wanted into like recording and all of that. But before we do, mate, do you want to just tell us a bit about what you do and how you got into what you do?
So I'm a sort of music producer and mix engineer. So I work in studios with artists and bands, either producing their stuff in the studio, recording it, engineering it, producing it, and mixing it. Or I often work with bands where they might record themselves and then they'll send me over files and I'll mix it. But previously, when I started out when I was younger, I was started as a musician. So, you know, I come from quite a musical family. My dad's a guitarist. My mum was a very good pianist and flautist. So I started off playing in bands. So I was touring for about a decade, and I'd be touring and recording bands at the same time. You know, on my sort of downtime from touring, I'd be producing people. And yeah, it just got to a point where I had to make a choice, you know, between the production work and the live playing. And that was a few years ago, and I decided to just throw myself straight into producing. And yeah, I've been doing it ever since, and fortunately still managing to make a living from doing it. But and I love it. I absolutely love it. Yeah,
it's amazing, mate. I mean, I've got to ask, what made you choose the production side of thing over the live side? Quite interested in that, because that's the way I would go as well. But I just wonder what made you.
I mean, I think I was lucky because when I was at school, like I played in loads of bands. And it was I've always been fascinated by, as much as playing and being a musician, I've always been fascinated by, you know, recording and production anyway. So I was, you know, while I was playing in bands and doing all that sort of stuff, I studied sound engineering. I'd be doing like work experience in whatever studios I could find, recording all my bands and local bands. And I think I loved, from when I was a kid, weirdly, recording was like the backup. You know, that was my fallback, which is ridiculous when you think about it. But I started playing, and all I wanted to do was play. And I toured with a few bands over the years, and I really loved it. But it just got to a point where I've been doing it for about 10 years, and your priorities change a bit, and you sort of think, I loved the recording work was getting quite busy, and I was getting to a point where I was saying yes to things and then going on tour. And then people getting frustrated because I can't do mix points when I'm away. And I love the creativity of being in the studio. Like every day I'm working on something different, something new, different style of music, different people. And touring, I absolutely love it. And I hope I'll get to do more, you know, in the future. But I think it's good to vary things up, you know, it's good to try different things. And I'm sure I'll come back to it at some point. But for now, I find the interesting thing about production is it's so much more about people and relationships with people than I ever realized. And I love that element of it. So that's the thing that I particularly, and also there's just so many possibilities to be creative. Like touring is fantastic and you love the moment, but there's also a lot of waiting around, traveling, and you're often playing the same set every night. And like, it's not, you know, and it's great. But it is a very, very different thing, you know.
Yeah, touring is like, you know, 18 hours of boredom followed by 2 hours of absolute adrenaline, and then rinse and repeat.
Exactly. And the thing is, and you do, you know, like you, it is great. But yeah, there's that side to it that can be quite full on, that people don't see. They see the photos of playing gigs and all the festivals. Yeah. That's amazing. But and as much as I tried, I remember I bought a laptop and loads of stuff, and I was like, oh, I'm going to be producing on the road stuff and everyone does it. And I remember the first time I was like, hey, I'm going to do some mixing while I'm on the road or whatever. And the first night, the dressing room was under the stage, so you just couldn't hear. Yeah, you never ever managed to do that. Saying the studio life at the moment, but yeah,
that's class. So, have you mixed any artists that we would know, or any music that people would?
So I sort of came from a very guitar based sort of world. So there was a big sort of punk rock scene in my town when I was growing up of Watford. So lots of bands came out of that, and that's where I tried a lot of, you know, work with a lot of bands. So there's bands like Gallows, who came from who I worked with. I then since then was working with the singer from Gallows, Frank Carter, in his band, produced him a couple of albums for him, and was playing in his band. I've gone on to work with, I did the last studio album for The Damned.
Nice.
Punk rock area.
But that's my generation. Like,
yeah, well,
I'm 56 years old, so like,
there you go, yeah. So
I was listening to The Damned when they first came out.
I mean, well, that was an awesome thing to be part of, because, to be coming from that background and then get to work with one of the sort of founding bands of that whole movement was really good. But then, I work with, but I think as I've gone on, a lot of my production work tends to be guitar based sort of rock bands. But what's been really fun about mixing is working with different artists. You get to try move into different areas. So, in the last few years, there's been more sort of pop stuff that I've done. So like recently I've been working a bit with Pixie Lott, which is the complete opposite of that stuff, really. But and playing in her band a bit as a bit of bass, and that's completely different, like stylistically, but it's still, it all requires the same way of working and the same sort of attention to detail and things. So there's some people, but there's a lot of. I tried to work out how many songs I recorded the other day, and I just sort of gave up because I've been doing it for so long. But I absolutely love it, and I still get that rush wherever anyone gets an album I've done on vinyl. I've got a little area of my record collection which is the albums I've done, and I take a lot of pride in it slowly getting a bit bigger every year, But that's some of the stuff I've done. But there's been all sorts of different bands, to be honest.
I'll just find. Sorry, John, go on.
I was going to say, in the process of that and learning on everything, did you ever come across any like special boards that you really like the way that preamp sounded, or they just did something to the transparency of the tone? Because there was a studio I worked in that had a legendary board. I think it was a Neve board. Yeah, and it had been used on Sparkle Horse's recordings.
Okay, yeah.
And so, I mean, sometimes when you come across certain equipment like that, then you're always chasing that again.
It's awesome when you get the opportunity to. It's an interesting one, because it's interesting my generation of producers, because when I went to college, everyone said, I remember this, they said one of the last things, we all had to write letters off to the studios in London to get work experience. And I remember at the time doing the maths and thinking, there's about however many of us across this year, and we're all writing letters to the same 10 studios that are still surviving in London, because every year the big studios were shutting down. And now, I mean, obviously there's a few of the big ones still going, thankfully, but now a lot of the producers a bit older than me, they were schooled working through those studios, working at all those, and that's such a, I'm really envious of that path in, because it's really, really, really hard to get into it. And then you see those guys and they've got to work on all that amazing gear and those amazing desks. I've gone about it in quite a different way, because I couldn't get into those places. So I just started recording bands in garages and people's houses and my house and my dad's garage. And so my experience, it's only been in the last few years that I've had the pleasure of working in these bigger studios and getting my hands on those sort of desks. Like, recently I was doing a bit of work at Core Studios in Acton. They've got this lovely API desk there that I really like. Do some work in Black Rock Studios, which is just being moved, and they've got this amazing SSL 4000 series, which I got to work on. But it's been interesting, because I've learned myself up on, I've sort of learned what I do on the equipment I could afford at the time, which has been quite nice. But it's also been now, whenever I go somewhere, I'll go to a studio and I'll get to use I'll get to use a certain desk, and it does make you work differently, and it makes you think about things differently. And if you've got the time, the hard thing with working in other studios is having the time to do the experimentation you want to do, because that's so expensive, just per day. But you get those bits of equipment now where you use them and you think, okay, that's got that sound now. I know that I'm going to use that, and I'm going to try and go there to use that again. And I think that's what it is. It's like everything. You just sort of you use something once and get a certain sound out of it, and you then go, okay, I'll remember that, and you can bring it out another time. Yeah.
There was a mastering engineer that I knew that he would bring in his own preamps into that studio because he loved the board so much. But he had some original preamps from the Abbey Road studio that somehow made it across the pond when they took that all apart.
Yeah. And I think you also become quite there's a lot of variables in recording, especially when you're going to different studios. When I go to, so having those few things that you can rely on them. You get to experiment on all the different stuff.
Yeah, he'd
nice to have those things to swear by.
He would drive across the entire country. He'd drive from California to North Carolina to use that board.
Yeah. I've definitely recorded in places where, I'd want to go a certain place for a certain thing, without a doubt. Unfortunately, the thing that's tough now is just the turnaround of working and what speed at which you have to work, and if I'm honest, the budgets that are going about at the moment. Now it's very much trying to do the best you can with what you've got, And I think, sadly, the days of those big studios, doing those big albums are no longer really here as much, unless you're really massive,
Yeah. I mean, there are some people that try and keep that alive. Some of the artists that are like really into the retro sound and the retro gear.
Yeah, like a few years ago, I say a few years ago, 10 years ago, I came to the States and I did a bit of a tour around the sort of deep South. And I remember I went to we did sort of New Orleans and up to Memphis.
Oh yeah.
And my poor wife made her. I said, "Oh yeah, we're going to go and visit this studio." And she said, "Oh okay." And we drove 4 hours into like deep out the middle of nowhere at Muscle Shoals.
Oh yes, the legendary Muscle Shoals.
Before they'd like redone it all, So it was literally just a room with like a leaking ceiling. And she was amazing about it because she knew how excited I was about it, just to stand in there.
Oh yeah, same as when I went to Sun Studios and stood where Elvis stood, and
Yeah, we did that as well. It's awesome, isn't it? But those rooms and those places it's amazing. Yeah. I love that stuff.
Do you think there's ever going to be a point where all that stuff's going to be obsolete, like going to Abbey Road to use, I don't know, whatever, the plate reverb or something, because of like modelers and we can take a capture of things and recreate it and things like that?
I think that I was working in a guitar shop when the first Line 6 pod came out, and I remember the guy came in and he was selling it and he was going, "Oh, this is it now. It sounds just like a valve amp." And I remember plugging it and thinking, not really, but okay, And so these things have existed for a long time. We've been working with these, and I'll be honest, some of them now are incredible. They're amazing and they're really helpful. But I do think that I think there'll always be a place for like real moving air, like people putting mics in front of things and people, getting, because firstly it's more fun, I think, to just get your hands dirty in that way. But also, I worry that I sound like a bit of a dinosaur because so many people now are just all completely in their computer. But when I get a lot of bands who produce themselves or record themselves, and they'll come to my studio, and I've got a lot of old valve amps, I've got loads of pedals, I've got and it's some of them have never recorded with real amps before, or like been in the room with a Marshall like cranked up,
and it's a whole different experience.
And also it's that thing of they sound, you're capturing a unique sound at that point. That's that mic, that room, that player at that point is completely unique. It's analog to the point of it, going into my recording system. And I think there's something special. I have to think there's something special about that.
I remember in the 80s when the new wave movement came and everybody was going with synthesizers and electronic drum kits, and everybody was saying, everything's going to be digital, it's the end of analog. And that lasted for about 6 years. And then everybody started going back to, I think it'll be cyclical. I think, the stuff that I just described is going to be cool with certain people. We're going to see a whole bunch of synth pop bands playing, Yamaha DX7s and
And the thing is, I think there definitely is that, and it's also the experience of making a record is also, I think, really important. I didn't really realize it until later on. If the process of doing it, is you get to try and experiment with things, than just sitting at a computer screen, with a guitarist all the time. I don't know. I much prefer that, but I don't know whether I'm just wishful thinking or I'm stuck in the past. You know,
I think cyclical things just spot on, because we do see it with guitar. I predict that there's going to be more kit that allows you to integrate the digital side of things with things that are really good. Like, have you got this amazing analog preamp? Well, here's an equipment that you can plug into, and it allows you to use it with your laptop, or stuff like that. I think that might be the future, because people don't want to lose.
Well, you see it now with, like, there's a few companies out there making mic preamps where you can run your signal through guitar pedals, and they've figured out impedance and everything to make it work. Yeah, there's a couple of them, because recording engineers, you want to be able to get creative and try different things, and there's already that is happening, and it's not, this, vinyl's selling better than ever at the moment, and because people are wanting real things, I think, and I do think that I hope I'm right, and I hope we're right, but I think there's definitely always going to be a place for it, and it will go in cycles. But I think people are going to start to get, I don't know, when something gets really big, there's a movement to repel it always comes, doesn't it, in some way?
I remember.
I always just think that you'll end up with stuff like you buy the digital thing, that's amazing. What's the aux box? An amazing bit of kit, but in 20 years' time, that's obsolete, or maybe not as good, or degraded. My Fender Showman is still going to be a Fender Showman in 100 years' time. It's still going to be amazing.
Well, it is what it is. It's not a replication of something, is it? And that's the thing.
That's it. Yeah. I don't know. It's overkill for me, but I think, why not? It feels different to play. So, and I know in the future they'll be able to replicate all the little nuances, but I just don't want. It's not even the fact that, like, I think that it won't sound as good in the future. Maybe it will. It's that my brain won't accept it. Do you know what I mean? So it won't be as good of a.
There's also an argument. I mean, maybe less so with guitar emulations, but for example, I've got a Fender Rhodes electric piano in the studio, and it's like a 70s. It's in dire need of being serviced. It's all a bit, all the sort of, nothing's quite particularly well balanced. But it sounds great. It sounds amazing. I love it. And whenever I've used any of the replicators, like any of the sort of software versions of it, they are technically better. They're more balanced. They've been properly sampled and everything. But there's something about the fact that it isn't perfect that makes it sound great, And I think that's the case with a lot of things, like and whenever I record anything on the Rhodes, I'm playing it, and then I play the same thing on the sampled one, even though they do sound great and I'd happily use it. There's a character there that is a bit chaotic, and the way it works together and the way that you're playing it, and I don't know, it just does. I still believe, even though they're very good, I still prefer it, and I'll always use it over that.
Do you use a Wurlitzer at all? Like
you know what I've got a clavinet, I've got a Rhodes, I've got a Pianet. The one I haven't got is a Wurlitzer.
That's one of my favorite sounds.
Oh, they're amazing.
Man. When and there are certain ones you hear them, exactly who is playing that one, because that Wurlitzer has a very specific sound.
They've gone crazy. They've gone.
Oh, I know. Expensive. We used to pick them up for $500 all day long.
Yeah, I remember when you could pick them up. But that's a good example. And I think that there's a, like all the amps in I've got quite a couple of, my dad's got a couple of old vintage amps I've got in the studio. And they've got their quirks, and they each sound, he's got an old AC30, which doesn't sound like any other AC30 I've come across. They all sound a bit different, and when it's working, it sounds great. That's the only problem.
Yeah, I love all that. I got to say, I'm a Valve amp guy. Like, I feel like when you're playing anything else, it just doesn't feel the same, and it never takes pedals as well. And the acid test is, if you plug a fuzz into anything, the emulations can never handle that sort of signal, whereas you plug it into a Valve amp, and it's like a match made in heaven. Even things like the Kemper sound great with overdrives. I was surprised at some bands that I've been to see, and they bring out the Kemper, and I'm like, oh, fuck. And then when they start playing, I'm like, actually, it sounds pretty good. But you put a fuzz in the front of that, and it's just it don't.
One of the things I did, I mean, a big part of production for me with guitars is, I've got a few. we tend to pick an amp quite early on and try a few things out. But a lot of my especially with a lot of the sort of rock and punk bands, is working with effects pedals. And yeah, the gain staging and how you push the front of an amp. I've got this really old Marshall, it's a 67 or 68 Super Lead. It's a really old guitar amp, and it sounds incredible. It's really clean. I mean, you have to turn it up. Obviously you can make it sound. It's ear-splittingly loud if you make it rock. But like you say, it takes pedals really well, and you're completely right in that. You know, you find certain pedals, if you really push the front of an amp with a fuzz or something else, yeah, you can't. It doesn't emulate that in the same way, and it doesn't respond in the same way to how you play as well. Which is a thing that, you know, I get a lot of people who say, "I'll record DIs, and then I'll come and reamp all my clean DIs through all of your amps." I'm like, it won't sound the same because you play into your sound. You know, you play into how your amp reacts. And you might not notice it at the time, but I notice it with people. You know, you change things or you change something, and it dynamically immediately makes them play a certain way. Some musicians more than others, admittedly, but yeah, I completely agree. I love nothing more than, you know, really pushing the front end, especially that Marshall, because it's one amp that it seems to make pedals sound amazing. But I don't really know what it is, but it works.
They were all built differently. The studio by me has got a 200-watt major.
Oh,
like,
yeah, the big one. Yeah.
And he got it for like a deal as well. Some old woman was like, "My husband's died. I'm getting rid of all his gear. I wanted to go somewhere nice," and just contacted him. So he's in this weird little old bunker that's like under the ground in like brick archways. It's like it's just such a wonderful place to go. And I'm like, I'm also major, never even seen one, you know. But,
well, have you been? I don't know if you've ever had the chance, but if you ever get a chance, if you're ever in Bletchley, Milton Keynes, the Marshall factory's worth a look because they've got a big museum at the front of it.
Oh, bad.
Seen videos, mate. Unbelievable.
I would love to see that.
Yeah, it's really cool. Like I've worked, so they've got a big studio there at Marshall now. They've got this massive. They've got the big Neve desk, from big old 60s Neve desk. I think it's 60s, 70s. Yeah, but they've also got this and they've got all of that. Yeah, all the Marshall Major, the first Marshall amp, and everything. But yeah, no, it's awesome. I love all that stuff. I was lucky. My dad's had a few as I was growing up. He was a guitarist in the sort of 60s and 70s, and so I was lucky to grow up in a house where I just discover amps that he'd put places that had gone wrong. Like, you know, I'd go in the loft and I'd say, "Dad, why have we got a Marshall amp in the loft?" He's like, that doesn't work anymore. So I'm still, and then I'll bring it down and get it fixed up. And I say, this is quite sort of sought after. And then he's like, "Oh yeah, okay, fine." And you can see him through the ages. Like he's got his AC30 we've still got, then his late 60s Marshall. Then he went transistor and he's got his Roland JC120. And then he's got he never sold anything. He just hoarded all this gear, and I get to use it in the UK. But yeah, that Marshall is my favourite by far.
Yeah, I'm definitely a Marshall guy. Although I've got to say, for newer amps, things like Victories and some of the newer brands, unbelievable sounding things for the money. There's some real good valve amp brands, especially coming out the UK. Victory, I mean, I'm looking over there because I've got one, but
I've heard them. They're fantastic. Yeah, they're great amps. Yeah,
the V40 for pedals is just like, you know, it's not clean or dirty. It's just the perfect pedal. And I know in the chat, Craze Fandango, he's just got recently one of the new high watts. That's like ear-splittingly loud, and that sounds awesome for pedals.
It's quite nice.
I definitely need to get.
It's quite nice seeing a lot of the sort of smaller they're doing these sort of smaller 20-watt amps now that are becoming and they're useful. And I have one in my where I am now, in my sort of down my garden. I've got a little sort of mixing room, and I've got a isolated cabinet, and then a couple of small amps. And it's nice. So even when I'm here, I can still play into a real amp, you know, but not annoy the neighbours too much, you know.
I used to have a Silverface Fender Champ that was one of my favorite amps to record with.
Yeah.
Because you could crank it up and it, you know, not get overbearing in the room with everybody, but you still could get a nasty sound out of it.
Yeah, those little amps are really fun.
Little 5 watts. Yeah.
Yeah, you often find they can sound bigger than the big ones when you actually get a mic in front of them.
This is my let's see if I can pull it up here. This is my little one that I favour for GA5T.
Oh, nice.
The trem on this thing is, so the tremolo, you kind of, if you pick lightly, there's no tremolo. It's like really wobbly or whatever. But you know, when you dig in and it overdrives, the tremolo disappears. And it's just like, so it's like the perfect mix. So you can like play lightly, you get all the wavy stuff, and then you bang a chord out, and it's just distortion, no.
Yeah. Oh, it's cool when you get these little quirks of amps. I love it. Yeah, definitely.
I love all that, and I love searching out amps too. I'm currently I've just got the bits together to do an amp build. I put it out on YouTube. I said, you know, what do you want me to build? Either a 100-watt Dumble, 100% want to build that myself, or something like a Tweed Deluxe. And the Tweed Deluxe won by magnitudes. I was like,
really?
Oh, yeah. Everyone wanted to see like a Dumble Tweed, you know, the Tweedledee.
Oh, okay. Right. I see what you mean. Okay, yeah.
The 100-watt ODS. So I'm making the Tweedledee. I'll sell it and I'll buy the parts for the ODS, and I'll keep that myself. Like, really, what I wanted to build myself a 100-watt ODS and just have it. But
just have it.
I'll put the vote out there to get a bit of attention, and I couldn't believe the results. Like, people want to see the 15 watts or whatever it is. Yeah, so that's a change in.
That's probably yeah, definitely.
Which is maybe that's a recording thing as well. Do you have any sort of go-to amps outside of the big Marshall, like you would say,
so
if you had to turn up, you know, and record a band?
I have I have a few different things. I think what you end up doing, or at least I end up doing, is I very much put things into sort of categories. Like, this will do these sounds well, you know. I'm fortunate that I've sort of built up this collection of amplifiers. So, you know, if I'm dealing with I've got a twin that I use. Like, so if I'm looking for something sparkly, clean, but still a bit, you know, still got that a bit of valve drive to it, the twin's really great for that. And if I'm, you know, it's also pairing right guitars with the right amps as well. So if I have somebody come in with a Les Paul they want to play, and I want something that's a bit, I don't want it to be too dull, or I want it to cut through, then I might pair that with the twin, because that'll work, you know. Because I think when you start producing, you're just thinking about getting every instrument to sound really big. But the further you go down the road and you start doing more and more mixing, you start thinking, okay, what do I want from this part? What do I want from this guitar sound? Okay, the guitarist is playing this Les Paul and they really like it. I need it to sit a certain place in a mix. So even at that point, I'll still be thinking about what amps I'll be using, because that'll have and what pedals, because that'll have a big effect. And the more I can, for example, get the sound as close to how I think it's going to be when I get to the mixing point, the less I have to EQ and do things later on, which does preserve the sound of it. You know, if you can make those choices early on. So it really depends. So I've got, I use a twin for that sort of stuff. I've got an old Mesa Boogie dual rectifier, which I don't particularly love for the heavy sounds. Interestingly enough, I love it for that sort of mid range. I find it's got a really good, I think this is what I was talking to you about. It's got a great EQ on it, which I love. You find a lot of valve amps, like I love Marshalls, but the EQ does nothing really that usable, really, when you just sort of, they do it does something, but it's not, you know, not as, and that's a massive part. So I use the dual rec, gets more use than, there'll be these indie bands who are like, who look at it and go, what? And I'll plug it in and they'll be like, oh, actually, it sounds kind of good. The old Marshall, as I said, there's this AC30, which I used to use, but it is so notoriously unreliable that you'd use it one day and then the next day you turn it on, it just doesn't work. And so it doesn't really, you've got a couple good. Like that where I'm like, you get fine, you know,
halfway through a recording session and have to switch amps midstream.
Yeah, and so that doesn't really work. And more recently, I got a matchless Independence 35 combo, which I got for a absolute bargain of a price on eBay from somebody who I don't think quite knew what they had. So I've been really enjoying that, and that's a great amp, and that's my new favorite one.
Oh man, Dave says, Joe, would you like to modify one of my Marshall heads? He doesn't have the minerals to do it himself. We'll definitely talk, mate, because I'm up for that. That might make a good video. And Grace Fandango says, what does Mitch think are the best mics for recording guitar amps? So Grace Fandango, for a bit of context,
there's a whole lot of
he does demos of pedals on YouTube, so he's mic and amps and stuff at the minute. He's just started out on his channel, So I think this might be quite pertinent to.
Well, I think it's really hard to say. I mean, with recording and production, you'll go on a forum and someone will say, it's like somebody going, "What's the best guitar for playing in a band?" You could,
The one that's in June.
They'll all work, and there's so many variables to think about as well. There's so many, what your guitars is, what your amps is, what your setup is, what you're hearing, what you're listening to. I tend to find whenever I'm miking up and it's also what you're doing in what context it's in as well. If you're just doing it as a guitar on its own and you're just going to play the guitar on its own, I'd think about it differently than if I was recording something to go in a mix. Because
that's interesting.
When you're on your own, if I went and recorded everything individually as if it was going to be played on its own and put it together, there's too much information going on there. Whereas when you're mixing it for just on its own, you want that to sound as big as possible because it's got to take up all the space. So, I mean, with guitars, I nearly always have a dynamic and a condenser mic almost, lined up so they're phase coherent, because I often find, and then I nearly always find myself using the dynamics, certainly in a lot of distorted sort of guitar rock stuff, just because. I just prefer the sound of them most of the time. And as for what mics they are, I vary up, and you depending what you're recording, and I'll try different ones. Like I'll know if I hear a certain amp, I'll be like, okay, a 57, I think will sound really good on that. Or I might, I recently got and then for condensers on an amp, I've really been enjoying recently. I've got this. There's a company called Austrian Audio, who they make. I think they're some of the guys who made the original sort of AKG mics.
I love AKG mics.
They're like the old style, and they do this new mic called the 818, which I really love. And it's a condenser mic, but it's not. You can sometimes find them to be a little bit harsh on guitars, but I find that particular one's really. I've been using that a lot on guitars. But yeah, it's hard to give a specific answer. I think that the key is just experimentation with all these things, because what I will do for my ears and how I mix something, someone else will do. Someone else has the same job as me and does everything completely differently, and will probably disagree with me on every single part of my thing.
Always.
But what you're getting paid for is your sort of taste and how you make things sound. So you all have a different path to getting there. And recording guitars on their own, it's not an easy thing. Making a guitar sound good, especially if it's going to be watched by somebody on their phone or on a computer, it's not as easy as people think. It's really easy for stuff to sound tinny and small, and it's more about the trial and error of EQ and mic placement and how you're playing. I think makes as much, if not more, difference than necessarily what the mics are. If that helps.
Well, I've got an interesting way to spin that question that may hit what Crazy Fandango is trying to get at. Is if you had a band that you had to turn up and record, and they said, let's say they're a blues rock band, whatever.
Yeah,
I'm picking that because that's the only music I know. But if that's all the context you had, you didn't know what guitars, what style he played, you didn't have any information, but you have to turn up and you can only take certain stuff. What would be your go-to stuff that you think, actually, I could probably make this work because this is how I use it and stuff like that?
I would probably show up to that with probably SM57s for guitar amp. I probably would, because they're really.
There's a reason why they're used.
They're just voiced. They're voiced, and you put one on and they do. It does just sound like how we. I also think there's an element of we replicate what we hear, and people have used them for years, and that becomes a big, But I'd probably pick that or an SM7. I definitely find that if I'm when I record bands live, I do quite a lot of sessions together, and I nearly always, because I know it's also more about knowing it as well, knowing how it's going to sound. I never thought I would, but now I can hear things, and I can sort of not tell exactly what mic it is, but I have a rough idea purely by how it's reacting, But yeah, I'd always go with that. But there's so many mic, a little bit like pedals. There's so many mic manufacturers out there, and everyone's got I've tried some stuff that's fantastic. I don't, I'm constantly trying to add to my collection of things because, like I say, you get different mics for different purposes. But yeah, I'm going to be boring and say Shure SM57s, brilliant mics.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a sensible choice. And again, it's the sound you've heard before.
And
yeah, it's a bit of that.
They're affordable. I mean, they're everywhere. You can find them all over the place, and they're bulletproof almost. I mean, I've seen some 57s take beatings on stages.
Yeah, definitely. I have too, and they're quite consistent between the different ones you get as well.
And if he's having to buy them, they're not all that expensive, which is brilliant.
I also find as well. I'm also on that note as well. I do find it the recording world is full of a lot of people out there who say unless you use a £10,000 microphone, like I don't like the gatekeeper element of that in production, and I think that tools that are available and are relatively inexpensive, you can make great music with cheap stuff, as much as you can make it with expensive stuff, but it's all got its place. And I love it when Shure probably should have charged more money for that mic when they brought it out, because it's been like £100 for like God knows how long. And the only thing that stayed £100 in the world, I think, has been a Shure SM57. So,
yeah, beating inflation. So Dave Lewis says, does Mitch use 2 amps wet dry when recording, or do you do like the old dual mono and stuff like that?
I think it depends what you're recording. I don't actually tend to do it with guitars that much because obviously I'm quite a one for being quite decisive when I'm recording. Like I don't want to be ending up with opening up a session and having like 4 mics on a cab or something, and then have to pick which is the best one. I quite like just getting a sound up, but most of the time, if I'm recording a guitar part, I'll have the sort of driven sounds, and that'll be the sound that will end up on the record. I will nearly always record a DI as well, so I've always got that. I've just found it to be good practice to just have that. 99% of the time I never use it, but occasionally an artist will work with something and they'll say to me, oh, actually I wish we had a bit more gain on that sound or less gain on that sound, and obviously I can then bring that back out and reamp that if I want to. The place where I do wet and dry is when I'm recording bass a lot of the time, because I find a lot of the bands I work with, and a lot of being a bassist myself and playing a lot of sort of heavier bands, everyone loves there's quite a lot of driven bass sounds out there, and bands that are wanting that, and it's very, very hard to do that with just 1 amp, because nearly always you put anything through a pedal and it nearly always takes that low end out, that real, you can sort of tell as you switch it in and out. And even though nearly all pedal manufacturers are going, yeah, this is the bass distortion pedal, still when I match them next to each other, you can obviously by dint of how you have to make them, they cut that low end out. So nearly always if I'm recording bass for like a heavyish band, I'll often have coming out the guitar, I'll have a clean DI I'll record, and then I'll split that signal. I'll have one going to like an Ampeg that's quite clean, and then I'll have something else splitting off to go to like a Marshall or something with some drive on it, so that you've got that fundamental massive bass sound, but then you can add in the drive you sort of want, and you're not taking away from that sort of sound. That's where I record 2 amps together. But it really depends what the sounds are going for. If there's an artist looking for a particular thing, yeah. But I do that quite a lot. It's all about getting the dynamics of how you play, But yeah, for bass, that's something I do an awful lot of.
I've gone down this rabbit hole just recently because obviously, as I was saying before the show, my videos are how to build pedals. It's nothing to do with the sound afterwards, but I'm getting so much hell because the internet's the internet. And like, that sounds terrible. Why would you make it? Like, well, of course it does, because it's me playing through, a camera preamp or whatever. Fine. But so I wanted to go dual amp because I've got I'm looking over here because they're massive pedal board with, like a gig rig splitter and stuff on it. And I do the wet dry thing. And I can never really add like a phaser or anything or flanger to a sound. when it's mono, because I feel like it takes over. If you're using a drive pedal, it becomes all about that flanger, and it just, I'm like, you lose that core, you know, like the thud in the chest, if you like. So I've like, how can I do that in my setup without making noise? Because I've got a wife and kids next to my workshop. There's no way that I could.
So recently, I've after a bit of experimentation with this. So when I'm in the studio, it's a very, very similar thing. So having that, it's being able to have that sound in parallel, basically, so you can dial it in as much as you want. So with that in mind, I needed to replicate some sounds which were 2 amps that I'd mic'd up, but I needed to replicate it live on bass. And I tried, as I said, I tried all the bass pedals that said they were great for bass guitar, and all of them, the bass element of it was just lacking. And I ended up getting, I forget what the company is now, but it's a tiny little pedal, and it's like it's basically like an effects loop. It's in parallel. You've got your dry guitar sound that goes through it, and then you've got a volume to an effects loop that you can put anything through. And I'm a big fan of the old Marshall Governor pedals, purely because they've got a 3-band EQ, which is really useful for stuff like this. And so for this big sort of driven bass sound, I've had my guitar going into this sort of effects loop pedal, and then I can have the Marshall Governor on however I want it set, and just literally mix them together. And you find that sweet spot where you have to compress going in, because if you don't compress going in, the harder you play, the cleaner it gets. Because obviously the clean guitar, the clean bass sound becomes louder because it can be more dynamic. Whereas obviously the distorted guitar sounds exactly the same. As long as you compress the bass going in, you end up with this, and it's really good. And I've used that, and that would work the similar way with what you're talking about, and now I've been using it in the studio with pedals, where I'm running the guitar through. I've got that fundamental guitar sound, and if I've wanted to add a bit of phaser or flanger or anything like that, it's almost in parallel, but it's in parallel then going into the amp. I'm not putting it in parallel afterwards, and I've really enjoyed doing that. And I think that's something that's and it's opened up a bit of a, when pedals are a bit too extreme, but you like the character of them, you can play with that sound in parallel going into an amp. That's been the thing I've been doing the last sort of 6 months. It's been really fun.
Well, I just redone my whole setup because I can't turn any of my amps on, because I work in the middle of the night, like 2-3 o'clock in the morning, and there's just no way. So I ended up buying two of the 2-note Captain X's. So there's like a DI, basically a low box and a DI and a cab sim for my Showman and like another 50-watt amp to run and record into 2 separate cameras without clipping, because you can turn it down on the low box, and then I can add effects going to one amp and then just distortion going to the other, and then I can play with the mix afterwards in post. And then if you're listening to it in stereo, and I'm like, if the people on YouTube don't appreciate that, well, fucking, I'm done then after that.
People on YouTube will always have a problem with something. Regardless what you do.
No matter what you do.
The funny thing is, I can barely play guitar, so it's never going to sound great. But it's just like, I want to give it the best possible chance. And I don't know, maybe one day in the future I'll make them up properly and do it.
Well, one thing I would suggest, and this is something I did, so I have a similar thing where I work. I've got a studio in Watford where I mainly work, but I also have a little mixing room down the bottom of my garden, and I like to do a lot of my mixing work here. And I bought it's like an ISA box. It's called by a company called Grossman. It's like a German
from
company.
TPS has got one.
It blew me away when I got it. I had my I forget what amp, some amp into it, had it really loud, and honestly, the minute I put the lid on, I could barely hear it. And I use that all the time. I absolutely love it. Because I was going to go down the same route.
Dan Steinhardt was like, I've tried everything. I've tried every silent recording method, every isolation box. Never really liked them. They sound, boxy.
Yeah, they do.
So he got the Grossman and put it in his spare room and drilled a hole through the wall for the cables. And now he's like recording at home.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of it because it is. wherever I can, I'd like to get some air moving, even if I'm down the bottom of my garden in the middle of the night and don't want to.
They're not cheap though, are they? Them cabinets.
I luckily found one. I found one by chance, second hand, but yeah, they are quite expensive. It's quite a small company, but it is. It does. It works. It really works. I was very impressed with that. But yeah, I think it's.
Just set up your set and forget your mics in there then, and you're done. It's
well,
ready to go. The lids on.
I've got it set up. So I have some amps here, and I have them all racked up, and then an amp switcher that has a load like boxes on it. I've recently been lent it by a friend of mine, and then that goes through to the ISOCAB. And then that's all mic'd up into my thing. So I can just switch on whatever input and that's all going through. And having stuff like that set up, you know what it's like. Your workflow, it's so much easier, isn't it? It's so important. Because when you feel like, in the moment or feel inspired, you don't want to spend 20 minutes plugging stuff in and because the moment's passed, you know. So I'm trying to get it as convenient as possible.
You know, in the home recording stuff that I would do, I was like, always at battle with my ex because she wanted me to break everything down as soon as finished a session. But I was like, I've got everything placed perfectly, and we can just come back in and record day 2 tomorrow and day 3. It's like,
it's really hard. I remember when COVID was happening, and I had to, I couldn't go to my studio, and I spent quite a lot of money on some really expensive headphones, and then I had to try and weirdly, I was mixing I had mixed a couple of live albums during the COVID period, which was quite weird when everyone's saying, we'll never go to gigs again and it's all gone, But I had to mix on our kitchen table in a flat in West London, and same thing. I'd do it, and then I'd have to pack it all away to have dinner, and then get it all out again. Oh, God, yeah. The minute I could get a place and be able to leave it and it be set up is amazing.
It makes all the difference. It makes you more creative too, because you can just go right in when you get an idea and start working rather than having to drag everything out and test it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think now, but there is, there's so much available now. Like, then I think about when I started playing guitar and I started getting into production. There's so much more available for that sort of stuff, and for people recording at home and wanting to get into production. A lot of my work is, as I say, mixing people who are recording in the same way you are. There's albums out there that quite regularly get in, top 10 that have been recorded in people's bedrooms. And that way all the time, if not most of them.
Look at what Beck did with a Tascam 4-track.
Yeah. But that's the thing. And there's so many, and I think it's just finding your own sort of way of doing it, isn't it, that works for you, and keep trying new stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I have this real hatred of technology. It sounds stupid, but my laptop is only for doing this live stream, and it doesn't get turned on any other time. And I literally switch it on, it opens up on a page, and I know I won't touch it ever again. I can't even edit video. I edit every video on my phone because I cannot use the computer. So there's the whole, every recording. So when people are like, oh, you could just, you can match up, record separately. Like, for example, this mic, I could never use that for a YouTube video because then I'd have to sync the audio with the video. I can't do that. And it's like, you know what I mean? But there's people who have all of this gear and recording stuff, and then a really good laptop, and they can just crack on and make something that's all right. It's not as good as if you go into a studio. It's never going to be, but it's bloody close, and it's getting there. It
comes down to how it comes down to your own taste and just trial and error, as with all these things, and also for what you need it for and what you want it for, and there's when you get to a point, it's not good and bad. It's just different, isn't it? And that's what music is.
Yeah,
different tastes and different, ways of thinking and different, definitely.
It's got me thinking that I'm going to start building some DI boxes with nice transformers to try and capture sound that way. So then you're getting at least a transformer in there and something, with a bit of give and take that adds something to it.
I think there's more and more I'm noticing in the recording world, definitely, of things like that, like front ends that are like a decent, like nice DI boxes. You can tell, and people, and like I was saying earlier about that mic, I forget the company that make it now. I'll just have to send it to you. But yeah, the mic preamp where you can run, especially a mic amp with a with an effects loop in it to run guitar pedals in, so you can be hands-on creative with you know, physical things as opposed to it all being in the box, because there is something to be said for it. And I think there's I like to try and do it as much as I can, you know, it's just because it's more fun as well. That's how I grew up. I grew up like listening to my dad play guitar, and one of my first memories is he used to have this old 80s, like it was an aria effects, like it wasn't a multi effects board, but it was like single effects in like a board. And one of the things that got me interested in production and sound was when I was like 7, probably 6 or 7, probably the similar age my son is now. He'd be practicing songs in his bedroom, and I'd just come on and push the phaser and see while it probably annoyed the hell out of him, but I loved it, and I'm still doing it, you know, 30 years later in the studio with bands going, oh, you got to try this one out, or I haven't tried that pedal before, let's give this a go. And you know, that's the bit that I love. I love that experimentation, because it's just about being a kid, isn't it? Trying different stuff out, getting excited,
and it never grows old. That's the thing. You're always looking at, you know, what you're going to be doing for the next, you know, however long, is something that's going to be an adventure and exciting. And
and I think the performance of getting there as well makes records more exciting. You know, like trying things like, oh, we went there and we did this, or we used this pedal, or we used this guitar, or, you know, it might not make a huge difference, but it all adds to the special nature and the unique nature of an album, in my
the whole synergy.
Yeah, I think so. And you know, definitely.
And people are like, I had this really weird experience, because normally in this, like in my workshop, it's only ever me. Even my wife doesn't come out here, you know. And I had my mate Todd, he runs like the Guitar Knobs podcast out in America. He come over for a week, and he come to the workshop, and I was like, I'll build you a pedal, mate. And he was like, can I have that resistor? And we did it bit by bit. But it took so long, because then I'd be like, while we're talking, I'd be like, oh, by the way, you need to try this pedal. Oh, and I've got a Hawk booster, you know, from Flynn Arms, or all this other stuff. And we plug it in and go away. And we spent ages going, can we get like, we'd just seen Oasis live. So we were like, can we get like the rock and roll star sound? Right, let's plug all this in. And that takes over. It took about 20 years to build this pedal. Normally, I'd have had it done in about.
But it's a good test as well, isn't it? How you're trying to, and I think that's the thing about production. It's that you've got a part, and you want to get it across in a certain way. How do we get there? Like, what do we try? And you find sort of happy accidents that go along the way that can actually make a massive difference. I did an album with one band, and for ages we were really looking for a sort of specific sound for like lead parts, and then we stumbled across this particular guitar with a plugged into I've got an old like 90s Big Muff, just DI'd. It was the most really harsh sounding, like, okay, it sounded that in with the other lead guitar sound that was there, and that just created this weird fuzzy sort of sound that sounded like nothing else. That guitar, it sounded really cool. And then we ended up redoing half the album's lead guitars because we found, and that was purely by accident. I think I'd like left the DI on and not the amp, and we plugged it in, and he started playing, and then all of a sudden that was it. And that came from just us experimenting, and then became like a big part of the album. Like that sound was like, and then so much so that when it got reviewed, I remember someone going, oh, and they're quirky use of keyboards throughout, and I was like, there's not a keyboard on the whole album, it's all this weird sound that we found. And it was purely from having like amps and guitars and pedals knocking about that we could try. And if you've got the time, and if you can, you know, that's the hard thing now, is time frames are so quick, is having that. So important to have that room to experiment.
I was spoiled back in the early 2000s. I had access to a studio that, you know, had all the toys. It had a C3, it had, you know, an SVT, it had, you know, all the classic guitars, all the classic amplifiers. And one of the things we would do is we'd go over there and just break out all the gear and start trying stuff and record it, because, you know, digital's free.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah.
And you start to realize why the classics are the classics as well. You start to realize why so many people love a Telecaster or love a Les Paul for their different. You start to come up with, you know, because they all, you know, this is sort of palette of instruments and sounds.
Once in a lifetime experience for sure. If I ever run into that again, I'd love it.
No,
I always wonder if it's the sounds that you grow up on, and because you've heard them so much familiar, that's why we gravitate to them, rather than like, this sounds good. It sounds good because of, like the epistemology of it, the history.
I think about that all the time, and I think that as I find it. I often wonder that, because music is, you're sort of imitating, aren't you? And you're trying to make things sound like the things you grew up listening to, but then that's constantly evolving. And I'm also aware, as you're a producer and you get older, you see the younger generation talking about albums that they think of as classics when you think they were made like, it feels to me like they were made last week, and actually and it's constantly evolving, but they're harking back to the stuff that they listened to 10 years ago that they like the sound of. Because I do think that 13 to 20 period of your life has a massive effect on how you that being exposed to music. And I think that you'll always, I don't know, that's really important. But I often wonder that as well. I think, does it sound good because that's what you've been told a guitar should sound like? It's a whole analog digital debate, because it really is, and
it's subconscious, isn't it? You listen to it day in, day out, and just eventually that becomes the thing.
And I think but what's nice now is that there's so much available to sort of get your teeth into. Like when I started doing what I did, there was nothing really on the internet about, not much. It was all very new when I started recording, and home recording wasn't really. So I mean, my first thing, I had like an 8-track tape recorder, like everyone did, and you had to bounce it down. I'm saying that to kids now, and they look at me like I'm crazy. Like, what you mean? And that's how I learned. Like I went to, when I was studying at college, we had a 1/4-inch Revox B77 I was taught on, and I think I was the last kids that were taught to cut tape,
do proper splicing and stuff.
And now, but that wasn't now I look at what you can do now. It's crazy.
I found the circuit for that. I think it's an A77. Did Revox do an A and a B? So the A77. So I found a circuit for the preamp. It's like 3 germanium transistors. I'm doing a video on it, funnily enough, but it's it makes a fuzz for some reason. Apparently, if you turn the gain up, it gets fuzzy really easy.
So, I mean, they were like there. That's what I taught. But then you think, then it was. I mean, that was old technology even when I was getting taught. But it was the beginning of digital was getting brought in when I was learning. But it's I often think that all the time, like whether you like something because you grew up listening to it or what. But there's just there's so much out there now. It's more about knowing. You can make anything sound like anything. It's more like knowing what you want things to sound like. That's the hard bit.
Yeah.
Making those choices.
I've got 2 questions to finish on, and one's like the best question ever to finish on, so we save that. But the main one, and this is a bit of a selfish one, for the people out there who are looking at getting into home recording or starting to at least record themselves, maybe make songs, what are the essential bits of gear that you would say that is the bare minimum to start with? Like, what should people be looking at? Because for me, I'd be like, I'm buying a new guitar. That's not helpful at all. I've got guitars. I don't need anyone.
That's probably the last thing I'd say.
People have got guitars. They've got amps. I'm talking about like specifically for recording and mastering.
Obviously, the main thing, now is a computer and some type of interface that will work. And there's so many now. Even the really cheap ones that are great. They're really good. So there's loads to choose from then. Do you know the thing that really made a difference to me, that made a massive difference in my recording when I started, was trusting what I heard in my speakers. When I first started, I had these huge. I bought the biggest speakers I could find because I just presumed that they're big and obviously they're going to be good. And I did loads of recording with them. And every single time I went into my car, I put something on, and it would always sound really dull every single time. And I kept trying to do mixes, and nothing was translating. And that's the hardest thing to do, is to get a setup that translates to the real world well. So if you can, and that's the one thing I would say, more than microphones, more than, you know, what type of computer you have or what type of interface you have or any of that stuff's all important. But if you can't trust what you're hearing, you can't make any choices. You can't make any real critical choices. And I ended up going to a shop with about 3 songs that I'd recorded that I knew didn't sound very good in my car or on my stereo at home. And I listened to 10 speakers, and I bought the set of speakers that sounded like my car because I could hear the same thing. And I wasn't testing the speakers because I wanted them to sound, I didn't want them to make my mixes sound good, because that's not going to help me. I wanted the speakers to show me what I was hearing everywhere else. And I bought these speakers. I still use them to this day. Talking about having a crux that you like, because I trust them. I know them inside out. So the one thing I would say, if you're getting into home recording, whatever it is, really try different speakers. And also, don't do what I do and get speakers way too big for your room. If you're in a small little room, get small little speakers and have them at a lower volume, so that you can hear it. Bigger speakers, I always feel, need a bit more power to get working right. But not only do you deafen yourself, but I often found that a lot of people have speakers that are too big for the place they're working in. But yeah, that would be my main suggestion. It's a bit of a boring one though. It's not like get a cool guitar.
Well, 9 times out of 10, when people want a new guitar or a new pedal or whatever, really what they should do is just change the speaker and an amp. So that makes sense to me. Would you go speakers over headphones for someone's first? Is that
well, it depends. Right. Okay. So it depends on obviously your situation. So there's a lot of people out there where if they can only work on speakers for an hour a day, then I'd recommend getting headphones, because then because of from that. But if like volume in the room isn't a thing, I'd always take speakers over it. There's something about, like I said, I did a lot of mixing during COVID, and I bought some. I spent like about 900 quid on some headphones, because I was like, these, and they were amazing. They sound fantastic, and I did all my work for a couple of years on them. But you still don't have, it doesn't create the stereo image in the same way, like, because you've got 2 speakers basically, sort of these headphones anyway, like to your ears. It's a very, very different appreciation. With headphones you can hear the detail in things, but it's a very, very, I don't find it as helpful mixing experience in having 2 speakers in front of you and creating that what's the word,
like space,
that image in front of you, and how that works,
the acoustic image.
That I find is much easier. And I'll always check stuff on headphones, always, but I'll never exclusively use them. Also, as well, from a pure health point of view, it's really easy to keep those headphones getting louder and louder, and before you know it, it's bad for your ears. You can't make any. I've found myself, when I've used headphones a lot, that's when my ears will be ringing afterwards, and the more I'll find I won't be able to make such critical decisions on stuff. So I've always got a set of headphones next to me to check things on. It's good for checking edits, good for checking little details, but I'll always take speakers if I can, as long as they're set up like okay and in a room I trust or I know.
And there's loads of videos on YouTube. You can go down a rabbit hole on speaker placement and stuff. I've done that.
But I think with all these things, it's all about finding what works for you to some degree. If you get the job done and you mix something and people hire you to mix something else off the back of that, or people just give you a nice comment and say they like that song because of that, then you've done it. It doesn't matter how you've done it. You don't need to have, like whatever works. You find some mix engineers out there who have crazy things they check mixes on, but it works for them. And that's, main
There's
thing.
A really good book that a friend of mine authored, and I think he's just done an updated version of it. John David Thomas wrote this book called The Producer and Engineer's Home Recording Bible. Or it's something in that. It's the home recording Bible for producers and engineers. But John David Thomas is his name.
Okay.
He goes through like a lot of stuff for somebody that just is getting started, like room choices, that kind of thing. Like, and you can like maybe find it on the internet used and have an analog copy in your hand.
Well, I think that having the monitoring side of it is definitely, that's something, because then you can make choices that are going to difference. Whereas before I got those speakers, honestly, mixing was a really frustrating thing to do, because I could never quite get it where I wanted, and it all seemed like, oh my god. And I used to think, is it because I haven't got this preamp? Is it because I haven't got this mic? Is it?
Yeah.
And then I realized that it wasn't actually that. It was that I wasn't hearing things correctly, so I wasn't making.
You go straight to the expensive stuff. Maybe I need
maybe I need that, and you think, well, I can't afford that, so maybe this is just what it sounds like. But it isn't that.
Yeah.
And that's what can be demoralizing for a lot of people, because they're thinking they'll go to that when actually it's they're not trusting what they're hearing. But
question from Craze Fandango: where can we find Mitch on socials? I'm going to blast about 1,000 videos from this out, mate, and he'll be tagged in them all. So if you want to find them, you'll find them on Instagram.
Yeah, I'm on Instagram. I've got a actual old school web page which I really need to update, which is thomasmitchener.co.uk, I think. But I'm on Instagram, and that's mainly it. But
cool. And the last question, which I've been dying to ask all the way through, but I've saved it. What do you think, and this goes to both of you, and you can only have one choice, by the way, is the single best recorded sound? I'd say guitar sound, but I'll throw it out to all instruments if you want to give a few ever. So for me, single best, I'll go first. Single best recorded guitar sound ever. Free, live in Granada Studios, BBC Manchester. That guitar sound that Costa's got on that is unbelievable. That is the first sound that I thought, I need to replicate that. And what I did was dial out all treble from every sound to make it thicker. And all it did was sound terrible for years. And then I realized, actually, no, I need more mids, more lower mids. And it'll give that lower end thump.
Yeah.
So I went for that mission because that song, it ruined me and both inspired me at the same time.
Okay. God, this is
that's a hard one, isn't it? Yeah, to choose just one.
I mean, there's loads for me, like ZZ Top's first album, brilliant. But that one recording session.
I've got one. I've got one in that realm. One of the guitar sounds I've always loved, and it's from a live album as well, is Pete Townshend's guitar sound in Live at Leeds. I've always loved it. I've always thought it's I thought as a live recording, it's probably my favorite live album, and of a capturing of a band that they're like peak. I think it's fantastic. But I particularly like the guitar sound on that record, because I'm not going to go as far as to say it's the greatest recording sound ever. That's you've set the question up to be
that was a lofty one.
Quite I'll hear something else and go no. But as guitar sounds go that I heard, and I remember thinking, wow, that sounds cool. I like that. I also like the fact that it's quite simple, and it's like, it's just he just controlled it. A lot of his playing was dynamically you could tell the amp set up in a way where when he digs in, it drives a bit more, but you could play stuff and pull back. And I love guitar sounds where it's not just full of gain. You've got that scope of dynamics and the way you can play and how it reacts. So that's my favorite. One of my favorite guitar sounds. I don't know if it's my favorite sound ever. I'm
going to listen to that tonight now. What about you, John?
I'd say it was Prince's performance at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction when he made that guitar gently weep. That being captured live and the tones that he a lot of that was him.
Yeah. So I'm with you there.
That's one of those, if I had to create a top 10 list, it would be up there, right in the top 3.
Amazing playing, and sounded incredible, didn't it?
Oh man. Well, on that bombshell, I'm going to end the show. Thank you very much for everyone who come along. Mitch, we need to get you back on, mate, because there's so much. Well, I feel like we should do a roast your recording setup or something like that, where people send pictures in of what they got and you just hang them out to dry. That'd be amazing.
No, I'd never. I'd like to be an encouraging.
You would probably have a hernia if you see what's behind the laptop.
But no, it's thank you guys, and I'm always just at the bottom of my garden mixing, so I'm around whenever you want me.
Awesome. Cheers, mate. Cheers, guys. Thanks for watching.
All right, happy 10,000.